she rescued a fox cub. Months later, she discovered a frightening secret about it. Clara lived in a small house near a wooded area, on a simple plot of land where almost everything was surrounded by dense vegetation. Her routine was nothing special. She got up early, made coffee, tended to the plants, and then went off to her job at the city library. But on one cold morning, something different happened. While walking near a stream, she heard a faint sound, like a short yelp almost drowned out by the water. Without thinking twice, she went to see what was going on. After, sliding down a slippery bank, she saw a tiny fox pup, all wet and shivering with cold. One of its paws was injured, and it looked so fragile that her heart sank. Even though she knew wild animals should stay in nature, she didn't have the heart to leave it there. It seemed abandoned, with no mother or siblings around. Very gently, she picked up the pup and wrapped it in a large scarf she had in her bag. The little creature barely moved, but opened its eyes for a moment as though understanding it was being rescued. She ran home, improvised a little bed with soft cloths, and tried to clean the wounds. She also warmed some milk, mixed with a bit of warm water, using a dropper to feed the small animal. During those first days it seemed scared, trembling at any louder noise, but little by little it began to trust her. So she decided to give it a name, because it was such a small, fragile fox, she thought. Chamito fit well. It sounded pleasant, was easy to say, and had a gentle ring to it. As the weeks went by, she and Chamito developed a bond that's hard to describe. Even though she knew foxes are wild animals, he seemed to grow attached to the caring way he received affection, water, and food. He ran around the house with a silent joy, sniffing every corner, though he still limped a bit because of his injured paw. In the late afternoons, when she returned from work, Chamito would come to greet her with those bright, curious eyes. Sometimes he seemed like a puppy, though he was a little fox, full of wild instinct. She consulted a local veterinarian who warned that foxes shouldn't live in houses for too long, but he also understood the situation. The doctor examined Chamito, confirmed he was gaining weight and had no serious illnesses. His injured paw still needed rest, but the worst was over. The recommendation was that as soon as the animal fully recovered, he should be taken to a safe area, preferably with the help of a wildlife protection organization. However, in that region, there was no specialized center nearby, and she feared that if she released Chamito too early, he wouldn't survive on his own. Time went by, and she couldn't bring herself to part with him. Every day, the pup grew, stronger, smarter, and more agile. Although the house was small, there was enough room for him to play. Whenever possible, she took him outside to a simple yard, enclosed by a makeshift fence. There, Chamito sniffed the ground, took little hops, stood on his hind legs trying to see farther. The graceful way he moved charmed everyone who witnessed the scene. Months passed. Chamito's fur became thicker. His eyes took on an even more intense, coppery tone, and his ears grew large and alert. He was no longer the helpless pup from the stream, but a young fox with the typical traits of an energetic animal. She noticed that lately he'd been restless, sniffing at doors and windows, as if something outside was calling him. Perhaps it was the instinct to return to nature, to explore the wild world. It was around this time that she started noticing some strange occurrences. At night, she would hear unusual sounds in the yard, as though something or someone was prowling around the house. She assumed it was just common forest animals, but one morning she found larger footprints near the fence. She initially thought it might be a stray dog, but on closer inspection realized they didn't look like domestic dog tracks. Maybe it was some other curious creature drawn by Chamito's presence. She didn't pay much attention to it. After all, she lived near an area full of wildlife. But not long after, when she was at work, a stranger visited her at the library. He asked about wild animals, mentioned he'd heard of someone caring for a fox around there. She gave vague answers, not feeling safe to discuss Chamito with a stranger. The man had a slightly suspicious demeanor, but it was impossible to be certain of anything. He left her with a sense of unease, as though he knew something important. A few days later, arriving home, she sensed a heavy atmosphere. Chamito was agitated, running back and forth, growling softly, very unusual behavior. He seemed to sense that something strange was happening outside. That night, while trying to sleep, she heard footsteps in the yard and then the sound of metal being dragged. She ran to the window and switched on the outdoor light but saw nobody. Still, the footsteps quickly faded away. Her heart pounded with fear. Why would anyone be prowling around her house? She began wondering if the man at the library had something to do with it. She preferred not to mention anything to neighbors, not wanting to draw attention to Chamito, but she decided to stay on guard. She locked the windows, reinforced the kitchen door, and tried to protect the area where the fox slept. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad might happen. It was only when she took Chamito to the vet again for a routine checkup that the situation became clearer. During the exam, the vet became quite serious and asked to speak with her in private. He explained that some time ago he'd heard of a group of illegal hunters who sold wild animals to anyone willing to pay. Foxes, especially those with rarer traits, were highly sought after. Chamito's coat had an unusual shade, a coloration indicating he might be from a subspecies uncommon in that region. It was possible his mother had been targeted by these hunters and that the pup had escaped by luck. The most frightening part was that, according to rumors, this group was in the area looking for animals to catch and sell. She felt a chill down her spine. So that was it. The man at the library was probably part of this scheme and had discovered she had a fox pup. The noises and footsteps in the yard were undoubtedly attempts to get close to the animal and take him away. The idea of losing Chamito after all they'd been through was distressing. But even worse, the pup was in danger, as these hunters had no mercy. The vet suggested she contact some wildlife protection organization, even if it was from another region, to help rescue Chamito. She couldn't just set him free in the local forest, because the hunters were there ready to capture him. He needed to be taken to a reserve or a specialized sanctuary where he could grow and live safely. At the same time, she had grown so attached to the little fox that the mere thought of parting with him made her chest ache. Over the following nights, she barely slept. She kept thinking about what she could do to protect Chamito. She had to act fast because she had no idea when the hunters might return to try to steal him. She remembered a biologist who lived in another city, known for working on wild animal reintroduction projects. Maybe he could help relocate Chamito to a safe place. Without delay, she got the biologist's contact information from the vet. She explained the entire situation, describing the rescue scene, the footprints in the yard, the stranger who showed up at the library. Moved by her story, the biologist agreed to come personally to examine the pup. On the appointed day, she waited, anxiously for the biologist to arrive. She had to ensure Chamito wasn't exposed. She kept him inside the house and away from the yard. To avoid suspicion, she closed all the curtains. The biologist arrived in the morning, parked the car some distance away so as not to draw attention, and came in quietly, so no neighbors or onlookers would notice. He looked at Chamito and immediately confirmed that he was indeed a fox with a rare coloration, probably an easy target for animal traffickers. He said there was an environmental reserve a few hours away where they cared for different species, rehabilitating them until they could return to the wild. In Chamito's case, who had spent so much time with humans, it would take a while for him to learn how to hunt and survive on his own. However, if he stayed, there was a risk of him falling into hunters' hands. The decision became clear. He had to be taken to the reserve. Even though it broke her heart, she knew it was the best option. Packing Chamito's things was the hardest part. She gathered the items she used to feed him, the blanket where he slept, and a cloth toy he loved to bite. As she placed everything into a small box, tears began to fall. She remembered how she had found him, trembling from the cold, near the stream. He was so defenseless, so fragile, and now he was strong, but in a way that no longer belonged to domestic life. He needed to be free, in a protected place, far from threats. When it came time to put Chamito in the special transport carrier the biologist had brought, the pup became a bit restless, not understanding what was happening. She tried to soothe him, stroking behind his ears, speaking softly, promising it would all be okay. She felt he picked up on the sadness in her voice because he stopped moving and rested his snout on his paws, as if feeling that this was a goodbye. Noticing the mood, the biologist said she could visit the reserve any time she wanted to check on how he was adapting. On the way to the car, she looked back, afraid she might see a shadowy figure or something suspicious. She did notice some odd movement near the entrance to the street, but couldn't make out what it was. Maybe just another passing vehicle. Even so, she quickened her pace, wanting to leave as soon as possible. The biologist put the carrier in the back seat, covered it with a sheet so no one would see the pup, and they headed out toward the reserve. She remained silent during the whole trip, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. She still remembered Chamito's sorrowful look on that first day. She thought about the time they had spent together, how hard she had worked to save that injured paw. And now she faced a tough reality. The same fox she had loved and cared for was also a coveted prize for cruel people who only saw him as a trophy or a way to make money. That secret, the fact that Chamito belonged to a rare subspecies hunted by poachers, was truly frightening. How could anyone harm such a beautiful, innocent creature? After a few hours on the road, they arrived at the reserve. It was a protected area with tall trees, trails covered in dry leaves, and birds of every kind singing. The welcome there was warm. A specialized team was waiting to receive the pup. She introduced herself, explained how she'd found Chamito, recounted the whole story, and emphasized the risks he faced if discovered by illegal hunters. The head of the reserve promised they would do their best to help him adapt, teaching him how to hunt, protect himself, and live without relying on humans. The goal was to eventually return him to the wild, somewhere free from danger. Saying goodbye to Chamito felt like losing a family member. But she knew she was doing the right thing. She crouched by the carrier to see him face to face, and he still looked at her with some curiosity. She wanted to say 1,000 things, but settled on speaking softly. "I'm sorry, but I have to leave you here. It's for your own good. I promise I'll come back to see you." The pup, perhaps not fully grasping the meaning of the words, lifted one paw and touched her hand through the protective grid. She left in tears, but certain she was saving Chamito's life once again. As she glanced back, she saw the biologist and the reserve staff already talking about how they would start rehabilitating the little fox. She felt relieved, knowing that capable people would continue his care. One chapter was closing, and another was beginning. Returning home felt strange. Everything seemed empty without Chamito running through the rooms, without his happy greetings whenever she arrived from work. There was also the lingering fear that the hunters might show up. But as the weeks passed, she noticed that the suspicious activity in the yard had stopped. Probably once they realized there was no longer any sign of a fox there, they gave up patrolling the area. Even so, she stayed vigilant, knowing people like that rarely give up easily on their profits. A few months later, she managed to take some time off and went to visit Chamito at the reserve. She was anxious to see him again. She asked the staff how he was doing, and they smiled as they answered. The pup had adapted well. learning to hunt small rodents and find shelter on his own. They had fitted him with a tracking collar to ensure he wouldn't get lost once they gradually reintroduced him to the nearby forest. She was able to see him from behind a safe fence, off in the distance, while a caretaker showed her where he lived. When Chamito saw her, he stopped running, perked up his ears, and tilted his head, as though trying to recognize her from afar. She softly called his name, and the little fox moved closer, sniffing the air. It seemed he remembered her scent, as he gently wagged his tail. She wasn't allowed to enter the enclosure, since that would undermine the independence they were trying to foster in the animal. Even so, just seeing him approach filled her with immense joy. She left with a sense of accomplishment. She had saved Chamito a second time, ensuring he wouldn't fall into the hands of unscrupulous people. The frightening secret that he was part of a rare subspecies coveted by hunters was still out there. But at least the little fox she had taken in now had a safer future. Gradually, she returned to her usual routine. When she thought of Chamito, she remembered finding him on that grey day, injured and afraid, and compared it to the image of him running free at the reserve. She might feel longing, but she also felt proud to have taken that first step to save his life. And in every memory, she was reminded of the love that blossoms when we decide to protect, to care, and to understand that there is an entire natural world needing our attention. In the end, the pup she rescued ended up showing just how delicate the line is between wildlife and human greed. He brought light into her home, changed the way she viewed the world, and proved that even a single act of kindness can make a difference. Chamito's story not only reinforced the bond between a fee, woman, and a defenseless animal, it also revealed that behind a simple, innocent gaze, there can exist a terrifying secret capable of putting both lives at risk. However, by confronting that fear, she discovered a strength she never knew she had. And by freeing Chamito from a cruel fate, she also freed a part of herself to love, without limits, everything that is pure and wild.